The letter trembled in Hannah Cooper's pale fingers as the stagecoach rattled over the uneven terrain of Northern California. Outside the window, the rugged landscape of 1874 stretched endlessly, a far cry from the cramped Boston apartment she'd called home for 23 years. She'd memorized every word of the marriage agreement, but still found herself scanning it again, searching for courage in the carefully penned promises of a man she'd never met, approaching Red Bluff. The driver called, his voice barely audible over the creaking of wheels and the thundering of hooves. Hannah hastily folded the letter and tucked it into her modest handbag. She smoothed her travel-worn dress, wishing she had something finer to wear for her first meeting with Preston Lawson, the cattle rancher who had advertised for a wife in the Eastern newspapers. Her single trunk contained everything she owned in the world: simple dresses, a few books, and secrets she prayed would remain buried in the dust of the trail behind her. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Red Bluff's Main Street, a bustling thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings. Hannah waited until the other passengers had disembarked before gathering her courage and stepping down into the bright California sunshine. Her legs wobbled from the long journey as her eyes searched the crowd for a man matching the description in his letters: tall, broad-shouldered, with a shock of dark hair beneath his hat. "Miss Cooper," Hannah turned toward the deep voice. The man who stood before her was indeed tall, his shoulders broad beneath a simple blue shirt. His face was sun-weathered but handsome, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair shot through with strands of premature silver. "Mr. Lawson?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Preston Lawson," he confirmed with a nod. "Welcome to Red Bluff. I trust your journey wasn't too trying." Hannah forced a smile. "It was long but not unbearable, thank you." Preston signaled to a young boy nearby. "Tim, fetch Miss Cooper's trunk, would you?" He turned back to her. "I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house. I thought you might want to rest and refresh yourself before we discuss our arrangement further." Relief washed over her. Hannah had feared he might insist on an immediate wedding or worse, take her straight to his ranch without allowing her time to adjust. "That's very considerate, Mr. Lawson. Thank you." As they walked toward the boarding house, Hannah was acutely aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. Red Bluff wasn't large, and news of Preston Lawson's mail-order bride had clearly spread. "I apologize for not meeting your expectations," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Preston stopped walking, his brow furrowed. "I beg your pardon." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "In my photograph. I know it was taken some years ago. I'm not as—" She gestured vaguely at herself, unable to finish. Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes, followed quickly by something else. Was it amusement? "Miss Cooper, you look exactly as I expected. Now come along. Mrs. Mitchell runs a fine establishment, and she's expecting you." The boarding house was a two-story building with clean white curtains in the windows. Inside, Mrs. Mitchell, a plump woman with a no-nonsense manner, showed Hannah to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," the older woman informed her. "Bathrooms down the hall. Mr. Lawson's paid for 3 nights. I reckon by then you'll either be married or heading back east." With that blunt assessment, she left Hannah alone. Hannah sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. 3 nights. 3 nights to decide whether to marry a stranger or return to Boston in disgrace, with no home and no prospects. She opened her handbag and withdrew a small leather pouch, counting the meager coins inside. Not enough for a return ticket. Not nearly enough. She'd sold everything of value before leaving Boston, everything except the simple gold locket around her neck. the last gift from her mother before consumption had taken her 5 years earlier. Inside was a tiny portrait of her parents on their wedding day, looking young and hopeful. How different her own wedding would be if she went through with it. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Cooper," Preston's voice came through the wood. "I'll return at noon tomorrow to show you around town if that suits." "Yes, thank you, Mr. Lawson," she called back, hastily wiping away tears she hadn't realized she'd shed. "Rest well," came his reply, followed by retreating footsteps. Hannah lay back on the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of all that had happened in Boston, the scandal, the whispers, the doors closed in her face. She thought of her father's gambling debts, discovered only after his death, and the creditors who had taken everything. And she thought of Thomas Brighton, the employer's son who had promised marriage, only to deny everything when she'd found herself in trouble. Her hand drifted unconsciously to her flat stomach. The baby had never drawn breath in this world, lost in the same fever that had nearly claimed Hannah's life. The doctor had told her, in clinical terms, that she might never bear children. Another secret to keep from Preston Lawson. Sleep eventually claimed her, but it was fitful and filled with dreams of Boston streets and accusing eyes. The next morning, Hannah awoke to bright sunshine streaming through the curtains. She dressed in her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days, and ventured downstairs, where Mrs. Mitchell served her a hearty breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Mr. Lawson's a good man," the older woman said abruptly as Hannah ate. "Hard-working, honest. Keeps to himself mostly, but respected in these parts." Hannah nodded, uncertain how to respond. His ranch is doing well. Not the biggest spread, but growing. He built a fine house 3 years back, 2 stories. Glass windows shipped all the way from San Francisco. Mrs. Mitchell poured more coffee. Lost his parents to influenza when he was just 20. Been on his own since then. "He seems kind," Hannah offered cautiously. Mrs. Mitchell's sharp eyes studied her. "He is, too kind, some might say. Took in his sister's boy after she died in childbirth. Raising him like his own." She paused. "But he needs a wife, a real partnership, not just someone looking for security." The implied question hung in the air between them. "I'll do my best to be a good wife," Hannah said quietly, "if he still wants me." Mrs. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "You've got sadness in your eyes, girl. We've all got our stories out here. Just be honest with him. Preston Lawson values truth above all else." The thought made Hannah's stomach clench. How could she be honest? How could she tell this respectable rancher that she had been ruined, that she had lost a child out of wedlock, that she might never give him children of his own? He would send her away, and then what would become of her? At precisely noon, Preston arrived at the boarding house. He wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard, clearly having made an effort for their outing. "Good day, Miss Cooper," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I thought we might start with the mercantile. You'll need to become acquainted with Mr. Garrison if you're to be living in these parts." Red Bluff proved to be a surprisingly vibrant town. Though small compared to Boston, it had all the necessities: a general store, a doctor's office, a schoolhouse, 2 churches, and even a small lending library that made Hannah's heart lift with unexpected joy. Preston was greeted warmly wherever they went, and he introduced Hannah as Miss Cooper, newly arrived from Boston. She noted that he didn't call her his fiancée or bride-to-be, giving her the dignity of choice in the matter. At the general store, the proprietor, Mr. Garrison, shook her hand warmly. "Any friend of Preston's is welcome here, Miss Cooper. We've been trying to marry him off for years, but he's particular." The older man winked at Preston, who actually blushed slightly. "Don't listen to his nonsense," Preston told her as they continued their tour. "Half the towns appointed themselves matchmakers since I put in that advertisement." "And the other half?" Hannah asked, surprising herself with the teasing note in her voice. Preston's laugh was rich and unexpected. "The other half thought I was crazy to send for a bride from back east when there are perfectly good local women who know what they're getting into with ranch life." "Perhaps they were right," Hannah said, sobering. "I know very little about ranching." "You can learn," Preston said simply. "If you want to." They paused in front of the schoolhouse, where children were playing in the yard during their midday break. "My nephew, Matthew, will be starting school next year," Preston remarked. "He's just turned 5. Smart as a whip, though. You raise him alone?" Hannah asked, remembering Mrs. Mitchell's comments. Preston nodded. "My sister Elizabeth died bringing him into the world. Her husband had been killed in a mining accident months before. There was no one else." "That's very admirable," Hannah said softly. "It's family," Preston replied with a shrug. "Nothing admirable about doing what's right." As they continued walking, Preston suddenly asked, "Are you hungry? The hotel serves a decent lunch." The Red Bluff Hotel dining room was the most elegant establishment in town, though it would have been considered modest in Boston. Still, the white tablecloths and actual silverware were a step above the boarding house. Once they were seated and had ordered, an awkward silence fell between them. Hannah twisted her napkin in her lap, aware that they needed to discuss their potential marriage but unsure how to begin. Preston cleared his throat. "Miss Cooper, I want to be direct with you." Hannah's heart sank. Here it came he'd decided she wasn't what he wanted after all. "I advertised for a wife because I need a partner," he continued. "The ranch is growing. Matthew needs a mother figure. And yes, I'll admit to being lonely." His eyes met hers steadily. "But I don't expect you to decide today or even tomorrow. I know this is a big decision, especially for a city woman like yourself." "You're offering me more time?" Hannah asked, surprised. "I'm offering you a chance to see what you'd be agreeing to," Preston clarified. "I'd like to take you out to the ranch tomorrow, show you the place. Let you meet Matthew, then you can make an informed decision." Relief washed over her. "That's very fair, Mr. Lawson." "Preston, please," he said. "If we're considering marriage, we should at least use our given names." "Preston," she repeated softly. "Then you must call me Hannah." Their food arrived: roast beef with potatoes and carrots for him, chicken and dumplings for her. As they ate, Preston asked her about Boston, and Hannah found herself sharing carefully edited stories of her life there. She spoke of her mother's gentle nature and her father's work as a clerk in a shipping office, omitting his gambling and debts. She mentioned her position as a seamstress in a fine dress shop, but not how she'd lost it when Thomas had abandoned her. In turn, Preston told her about his ranch, the cattle operation he'd built from the small herd his father had left him, the challenges of drought years and cattle thieves, and his dreams of expanding further west. "It's not an easy life," he admitted. "The work is hard and the rewards aren't always immediate, but there's something about building something with your own hands, watching it grow." He trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed by his own enthusiasm. "It sounds fulfilling," Hannah said, and meant it. After lunch, they continued their tour, ending at the small church where they would be married if Hannah agreed. The wooden building was simple but well-maintained, with colorful glass windows that cast rainbow patterns on the plain pews. "Reverend Walsh holds services every Sunday," Preston explained. "He's a good man, practical in his sermons, not one for fire and brimstone." Hannah nodded, trying to imagine herself walking down this short aisle to marry a man she barely knew. "I should get you back to the boarding house," Preston said, noting the late afternoon sun. "I've got to head back to the ranch to check on things. Matthew's with my foreman's wife, but I don't like to leave him too long." As they walked back, Preston asked, "Shall I come for you around 9 tomorrow morning? It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." "Yes, that would be fine," Hannah replied, her mind already racing with thoughts of what tomorrow would bring. At the boarding house steps, Preston paused. "Hannah," he said, her name still sounding new on his lips, "I want you to know something. If you decide this isn't what you want, I'll purchase your ticket back east. I won't leave you stranded." The unexpected offer brought a lump to Hannah's throat. "Why would you do that?" "Because marriage should be a choice freely made," he said simply. "Even out here." With that, he tipped his hat and left her standing on the steps, watching his tall figure recede down the dusty street. That night, after a quiet dinner with the other boarders, Hannah sat on her bed and carefully reviewed her options. She could marry Preston Lawson, a kind man by all accounts, who offered her security and a fresh start. Or she could return to Boston, where she had nothing and no one, where her reputation was in tatters. It should have been an easy decision. Yet she was troubled by the secrets she kept. Preston valued honesty, but could she bring herself to tell him the truth? And if she didn't, could she live with the deception? Hannah fingered the locket at her throat. What would her mother advise? Probably to tell the truth and accept the consequences. But her mother had never faced the harsh realities that Hannah had encountered these past years. The world was not kind to women with no money and no family, especially those with ruined reputations. She slept poorly that night, her dreams a confused tangle of Boston streets and unfamiliar prairie landscapes. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Hannah dressed in her most practical outfit, a brown skirt and cream blouse, and braided her hair severely back from her face. If she was to see ranch life, she wanted to appear capable, not frivolous. Preston arrived promptly at 9 with a rented buggy. "I thought this would be more comfortable than horseback for your first visit," he explained as he helped her up. The ride to the Lawson Ranch took them out of Red Bluff and into the surrounding countryside. The landscape opened up before them, rolling hills giving way to broader valleys where cattle grazed in the distance. The April air was fresh, and wildflowers dotted the meadows with splashes of color. "It's beautiful," Hannah said, genuinely impressed by the vastness of it all. "It can be harsh too," Preston cautioned. "Winters bring snow to the higher elevations, summer can be brutally hot, and we're always watching the sky for rain." He pointed to a distant line of trees. "That's Redwood Creek. It runs through the north end of my property. Never runs dry, even in the worst drought years. That's what makes this land valuable." They crested a small rise, and suddenly Hannah could see the ranch spread out before them. A substantial 2-story house stood in a clearing, painted white with green shutters. Behind it were several outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, what looked like a smokehouse, and corrals. In the distance, a small herd of cattle grazed peacefully. "There it is," Preston said, a note of pride in his voice. "Not the biggest spread in the county, but it's mine. Paid for free and clear last year." As they approached, Hannah noticed a small figure dart from behind the barn and run toward the house. "Is that Matthew?" Preston confirmed with a smile. "Looks like he spotted us coming." By the time they pulled up to the house, a small boy with dark hair was standing on the porch, bouncing with excitement. Beside him stood a middle-aged woman with a kindly face. "Uncle Preston," the boy shouted as Preston helped Hannah down from the buggy. "You brought her." "You brought the lady from your letters, Matthew, mind your manners," Preston admonished gently. "Miss Cooper, this is my nephew Matthew, and this is Mrs. Garcia, our housekeeper." "Welcome, Miss Cooper," Mrs. Garcia said with a warm smile. "I hope your journey was not too tiresome." "Thank you, it's lovely to meet you both," Hannah replied, a bit overwhelmed by the reception. Matthew was staring at her intently. "Are you going to be my new aunt?" he asked bluntly. "Matthew," Preston and Mrs. Garcia exclaimed in unison. Hannah knelt down to the boy's level, surprising herself with the gesture. "I don't know yet, Matthew. Your uncle and I are still getting to know each other, but I'm very pleased to meet you." The boy nodded seriously. "Uncle Preston said you lived in a big city with tall buildings. Is that true?" "It is," Hannah confirmed. "Boston has many tall buildings and streets so busy you have to be very careful crossing them." "Were there lots of horses?" Matthew asked, eyes wide. "Many horses pulling carriages and wagons," Hannah told him. "I have a pony," Matthew announced proudly. "His name is Pepper. Do you want to see him?" Hannah glanced up at Preston, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd love to see your pony," she told Matthew. "First, let Miss Cooper catch her breath," Mrs. Garcia interjected. "I've made lemonade. Come inside, please." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The front door opened into a large living area with a stone fireplace. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space: a sofa, several chairs, and bookshelves built into the walls. To the right was a dining room with a large oak table that could seat at least 8 people. Through another doorway, Hannah glimpsed a well-appointed kitchen. "It's lovely," Hannah said, genuinely impressed. "It's home," Preston replied simply. "Upstairs are 4 bedrooms and a small study." They settled in the living room with glasses of lemonade. Matthew, unable to contain his excitement, told Hannah all about his pony, his collection of arrowheads, and the fox family that lived near the creek. Hannah found herself charmed by the boy's enthusiasm and Preston's gentle patience with him. After refreshments, Preston suggested a tour of the property. "Matthew, why don't you show Miss Cooper your pony while I check in with Jim about the new calves?" The boy eagerly took Hannah's hand, leading her to a small corral near the barn where a shaggy brown pony grazed contentedly. "This is Pepper," Matthew announced proudly. "Uncle Preston got him for my birthday. I'm learning to ride all by myself." "He's a very handsome pony," Hannah said, reaching out to pat the animal's soft nose. "You know how to ride, Miss Cooper?" Matthew asked. "I'm afraid not," Hannah admitted. "In Boston, I usually walked or took omnibuses. Those are like stage coaches that run regular routes through the city." Matthew's eyes widened. "But everyone knows how to ride, even babies," Hannah laughed. "I don't think babies can ride horses, Matthew." "Well, almost everyone," the boy amended. "Uncle Preston can teach you. He's the best rider in the whole territory. That's what Mr. Jim says." "Is that so?" Hannah smiled, glancing over to where Preston was deep in conversation with a weathered-looking man she assumed was the foreman. "Uh-huh, and he can shoot really good too. He killed a mountain lion that was after our chickens last winter." Matthew's expression turned serious. "Do you know how to shoot, Miss Cooper?" "No, I don't," Hannah said. "Ladies in Boston don't usually carry firearms." Matthew looked genuinely perplexed by this information. "But what if there's danger?" The question gave Hannah pause. "What indeed?" In Boston, there had been policemen, neighbors, the illusion of safety in numbers. Out here, with miles between homes, people clearly had to be more self-reliant. "I suppose I'd have to learn," she said finally. Matthew nodded approvingly. "Uncle Preston could teach you that too. He's real patient." "He's teaching me, but I'm not allowed to touch the guns without him yet." Preston joined them then, having finished his business with the foreman. "I see you've met Pepper," he said. "Matthew, why don't you go help Mrs. Garcia gather some eggs for lunch? Miss Cooper and I are going to walk down to the creek." "Can I come too?" Matthew asked hopefully. "Not this time," Preston said firmly. "Miss Cooper and I need to talk about grown-up things." The boy's shoulders slumped, but he didn't argue. "Yes, sir," he said, then brightened. Can I show Miss Cooper my arrowhead collection after lunch? If she's interested, yes, Preston agreed. I'd like that very much, Hannah assured the boy, who beamed before running off toward the house. Preston led Hannah along a well-worn path that wound through a small grove of oak trees. Matthew seems quite taken with you, he observed. He's a delightful child, Hannah said honestly. You've done well with him. I've tried, Preston said. It hasn't always been easy raising a boy alone. Mrs. Garcia has been a godsend, but a boy needs a mother. Hannah's heart squeezed painfully. He seems happy and well-adjusted. He is. But he asks questions about his mother, my sister, questions I don't always know how to answer. Preston paused. Elizabeth was always the one with the right words. I'm more comfortable with cattle than conversations. I think you do just fine, Hannah said softly. They emerged from the trees to find themselves on the banks of a clear, swift-flowing creek. The water gurgled pleasantly over rocks, and the grass along the banks was lush and green. Preston gestured to a flat boulder near the water's edge. Shall we sit? This is one of my favorite spots on the whole ranch. Once they were seated, Preston turned to face Hannah directly. I brought you here because I want to be honest about what I'm offering and what I'm asking. Hannah nodded, her throat suddenly dry despite the lemonade they'd consumed earlier. This land, this ranch, it's my life's work, Preston began. My father started with just 50 head of cattle and a dream. When he and my mother died, I promised myself I'd build something they'd be proud of. He gestured around them. This is a good life, but it's not an easy one. The work is constant. The weather doesn't care about your plans. There are dangers, wild animals, rustlers, accidents. Hannah listened intently as he continued. If you became my wife, you'd be taking on all of this. The house needs a woman's touch, I freely admit that. Matthew needs mothering, and He hesitated. I need a partner. Someone to stand beside me to share the burdens and the joys. What would my duties be? Hannah asked practically, running the household, helping with the garden. Mrs. Garcia has started, teaching Matthew his letters until he's old enough for proper schooling, and, he added with a slight flush, the usual wifely duties. Hannah felt her own cheeks warm at the oblique reference to the marriage bed. I see. In return, Preston continued, I offer you my name, my protection, and my respect. The house would be as much yours as mine. I'm not a rich man, but we want for nothing essential, and I would never raise my hand to you or speak to you unkindly. The last assurance told Hannah much about what he thought women from the East might fear about Western men. You mentioned children, Hannah said carefully. Beyond Matthew, I mean. Preston nodded. In time, yes, I'd hope for children of our own, but, he added quickly, I wouldn't expect. That is, I understand these things can take time. Hannah looked away, her eyes fixed on the flowing water. This was the moment to tell him to confess her past and the doctor's prognosis. But the words stuck in her throat. If she told him now, he would withdraw his offer. She would be sent back east with a ticket he could ill afford to purchase, and nothing would have changed for her. Hannah, Preston's voice broke into her thoughts. I don't mean to rush you. As I said before, this is a decision that shouldn't be made lightly. She turned back to him, studying his face, the kind eyes, the honest expression. He was a good man, offering her far more than she had any right to expect given her circumstances. I'd like to accept your proposal, she said quietly. Preston's eyes widened slightly. Are you certain? You've only seen a small part of what life would be like here. I've seen enough, Hannah insisted. You're offering me a home, a family, that's more than I had in Boston. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Preston studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. If you're sure, then I'd be honored to make you my wife. We could speak to Reverend Walsh tomorrow. So soon? Hannah asked, momentarily taken aback. unless you'd prefer to wait, Preston offered immediately. We could have a longer engagement if you wish. Hannah thought quickly. A longer engagement meant more time for him to discover her secrets, more opportunities for her to lose her nerve. No, she said firmly. Tomorrow is fine. A slow smile spread across Preston's face. Then tomorrow it shall be. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and solid. I'll do my best to be a good husband to you, Hannah. That's my promise. And I'll try to be a good wife, she replied, ignoring the twist of guilt in her stomach. They returned to the house to find Matthew eagerly awaiting them with his arrowhead collection spread out on the dining table. Mrs. Garcia had prepared a substantial lunch of beef stew and fresh bread. During the meal, Preston announced their decision. Matthew, Miss Cooper has agreed to marry me. After tomorrow, she'll be living here with us as your Aunt Hannah. The boy's eyes grew wide with excitement. Really? Forever and ever. That's generally how marriage works, Preston said with a chuckle. Matthew turned to Hannah. Will you read me stories like my mother used to? Uncle Preston says she always read to me, but I don't remember. The innocent question nearly brought tears to Hannah's eyes. Yes, Matthew, I'd be happy to read to you. Mrs. Garcia offered her congratulations, though Hannah thought she detected a hint of reservation in the older woman's eyes. Did she sense that Hannah was hiding something? After lunch, Preston showed Hannah the rest of the property, including the vegetable garden, the chicken coop, and the corrals where the horses were kept. It was a well-organized operation, everything maintained with obvious care. Your ranch is impressive, Hannah told him as they walked back toward the house. You've built something remarkable here. Preston looked pleased by the compliment. There's still much to do. I'd like to increase the herd by another 100 head this year. And the north pasture needs better fencing. They spent the remainder of the afternoon at the ranch, with Hannah getting to know Matthew better and observing the rhythm of daily life. By the time Preston drove her back to town in the early evening, she felt both exhausted and strangely exhilarated. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Preston Lawson. She would have a home, security, and a chance at a new life. If only she could silence the voice in her head that whispered she was building that new life on a foundation of lies. That night in her room at the boarding house, Hannah wrote a letter, a confession of sorts, detailing her past and her secrets. She sealed it carefully, writing Preston's name on the envelope. If her courage failed her in person, perhaps she could leave this for him to find. It was a coward's solution, but it eased her conscience enough to allow her to sleep. The next morning, Hannah dressed in her best outfit, a dark blue dress with a lace collar, the most modest of her Boston finery. She arranged her hair simply but attractively, securing it with the tortoiseshell combs that had belonged to her mother. The letter of confession remained in her handbag, its presence like a weight. Mrs. Mitchell provided a special breakfast and even presented Hannah with a small bouquet of wildflowers from her garden. For luck, the older woman said gruffly. Every bride should have flowers. Preston arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, dressed in what was clearly his finest attire, a dark suit that looked slightly uncomfortable on his tall frame. He'd had his hair trimmed and his face was freshly shaven. You look beautiful, he told Hannah when she came downstairs. Thank you, she replied, touched by his obvious efforts to make their wedding day special despite its hasty arrangement. They rode to the church in the same buggy he'd used the day before, though he'd added ribbons to the horses' bridles for the occasion. Reverend Walsh was waiting for them, along with Mrs. Garcia and Matthew, who was scrubbed so clean his cheeks shone. The ceremony was brief but dignified. Hannah repeated her vows in a steady voice, trying to focus on the hope of a new beginning rather than the secrets she carried. When Preston slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, He whispered she felt a surge of mingled joy and terror. This was real. She was married. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present Mr. and Mrs. Preston Lawson. Reverend Walsh announced to the small gathering, which had grown to include a few curious townspeople who had heard about the wedding. After accepting congratulations from those present, Preston helped Hannah back into the buggy. "I thought we might have lunch at the hotel before heading home," he suggested. "A small celebration. Home." The word echoed in Hannah's mind. She had a home now, a husband, a family of sorts. The letter in her handbag seemed to burn against her side. Lunch at the hotel was a festive affair, with the proprietor insisting on providing champagne when he learned they were newly wed. Matthew, who had never tasted the bubbly drink, was allowed a tiny sip and pronounced it spicy water, making everyone laugh. Afterward, they returned to the boarding house to collect Hannah's trunk. Mrs. Mitchell hugged her farewell, whispering, "Be happy, girl, and remember what I said about honesty." The reminder sent a fresh wave of guilt through Hannah. As Preston loaded her trunk into the back of the buggy, she slipped her hand into her handbag, fingers closing around the letter. Now was the time, before they returned to the ranch, before her deception went any further. "Preston," she began, her voice catching. He turned to her, his expression open and expectant. "Yes, Hannah," the words died in her throat. How could she tell him now on their wedding day with Matthew watching from the buggy with bright, excited eyes? How could she risk destroying this new life before it had even begun? "I thank you," she said instead, "for everything." Preston smiled, obviously pleased but slightly puzzled by her intensity. "You're welcome. Shall we go home?" Home. Yes, she would make it her home, Hannah decided. She would be the best wife and aunt she could be. Perhaps in time, when Preston knew her better, when he had come to care for her as more than just a convenient partner, perhaps then she could find the courage to tell him the truth. The journey back to the ranch was filled with Matthew's chatter about where Hannah's things would go, which bedroom would be hers with Uncle Preston. Obviously, the boy stated matter-of-factly, and his plans to show her the fox kits by the creek. Preston caught Hannah's eye over the boy's head and smiled apologetically for the child's exuberance. Hannah smiled back, feeling a genuine warmth for both of them. When they arrived at the ranch, several of the ranch hands had gathered to greet the newlyweds. Jim, the foreman, presented Hannah with a handmade wooden box for her sewing supplies, and his wife had baked a cake. It was a simple but heartfelt welcome that brought unexpected tears to Hannah's eyes. That evening, after Matthew had finally been persuaded to go to bed, but only after Hannah had read him not one but two stories, Hannah found herself alone with Preston in their bedroom. The room was spacious, with a large four-poster bed dominating the space. A dressing table stood near the window and a wardrobe against one wall. "I cleared those drawers for your things," Preston said, pointing to the dresser, "and half the wardrobe. If you need more space, it's perfect," Hannah assured him. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. Despite the intimacy implied by sharing a bedroom, they were still virtual strangers. Preston cleared his throat. "I'll give you some privacy to prepare for bed," he said, taking a nightshirt from a hook and retreating from the room. Left alone, Hannah changed into her nightgown with trembling fingers. This was her wedding night. Preston would have certain expectations, as was his right as her husband. The thought filled her with a complicated mix of emotions, anxiety, certainly, but also a strange anticipation. Preston was a handsome man, and he had been nothing but kind to her. When he returned, Hannah was sitting at the dressing table brushing her hair. Preston stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had called her beautiful in a very long time. "Thank you." Preston crossed to the bed and turned down the covers on both sides. Then he sat on the edge of the mattress, regarding her thoughtfully. "Hannah, I want you to know something I don't expect. That is, I understand this has all happened very quickly. If you need time." It took her a moment to understand what he was offering. When she did, fresh tears sprang to her eyes. "You would wait, of course," Preston said, looking slightly alarmed by her tears. "Marriage is about respect, Hannah. I wouldn't force myself on you." The kindness of the gesture nearly broke her. Here was yet another chance to tell him the truth, to explain why his understanding meant so much to her. The letter was still in her handbag, just across the room. But once again, courage failed her. Instead, she rose from the dressing table and came to sit beside him on the bed. "You're a good man, Preston Lawson," she said softly. I think I could grow to care for you very much." Preston's eyes darkened. "I'd like that," he said, his voice husky. Hesitantly, he reached out to touch her cheek. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in slowly and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, questioning rather than demanding. Hannah found herself responding to his tenderness, her hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they broke apart, both were breathing a little faster. "Was that all right?" Preston asked. Hannah nodded. "Yes," he smiled, looking both relieved and pleased. "Good, that's good." He kissed her again, more confidently this time. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Preston's arm around her waist and his breathing deep and even in sleep, Hannah stared at the ceiling. Their lovemaking had been considerate and gentle, with Preston attentive to her comfort throughout. He hadn't seemed to notice or care about her lack of innocence, and for that, at least, she was grateful. But the larger secret still lay between them, unspoken. Sooner or later, Preston would expect children. What would happen when months passed with no sign of pregnancy? What would he think when he realized she might never give him the family he clearly wanted? Hannah turned her face into the pillow, silently promising herself that she would tell him soon. Just not yet. Not until she had proven her worth as a wife in other ways. Not until she had made herself indispensable to him and to Matthew. The days that followed settled into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural. Hannah took over management of the household, working alongside Mrs. Garcia until she learned the rhythms of ranch life. She discovered she enjoyed the vegetable garden, finding satisfaction in coaxing food from the earth with her own hands. She learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, to churn butter without making her arms ache unbearably, and to bake bread in the temperamental oven. Matthew attached himself to her like a shadow whenever his uncle didn't require him elsewhere. The boy's quick mind and eager questions reminded Hannah of her brief stint as a teacher's assistant in Boston, before her father's debts had forced her to seek more lucrative employment. She began setting aside time each day for his lessons, teaching him to read and write and count with a patience that surprised even herself. Preston, for his part, seemed genuinely pleased with his mail-order bride. He complimented her cooking, admired her efforts with the garden, and thanked her for the attention she paid to Matthew. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Sometimes he would read aloud from one of his books. He had a particular fondness for Shakespeare, which had surprised and delighted Hannah. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they continued to discover each other as husband and wife. Hannah found herself responding to Preston's touch with increasing warmth, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine desire. It seemed impossible that she could feel this way for a man she had known for such a short time, and yet she did. But as April gave way to May, and May to June, the specter of her secret loomed larger. Each month brought the physical confirmation that she was not with child, and though Preston said nothing, Hannah caught him watching her sometimes with a questioning look in his eyes. The letter of confession remained in her handbag, which she had stowed in the bottom drawer of the dresser. Sometimes at night, when Preston was still out checking the herd or meeting with Jim, Hannah would take it out and stare at it, wondering if today should be the day she finally told him the truth. But each time she found a reason to wait, just a little longer. Just until she had finished the new curtains for the kitchen. Just until she had taught Matthew to read that difficult book. Just until she had proven herself irreplaceable. It was late June when the situation came to a head. Hannah was in the vegetable garden, harvesting early peas, when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Looking up, she saw Preston riding hard toward the house, his expression grim. Behind him came Jim, leading a horse with what appeared to be a body draped over the saddle. Hannah dropped her basket and ran toward them. "Preston, what happened?" Preston dismounted in a fluid motion. One of the hands was thrown from his horse, hit his head on a rock. "He's alive but unconscious." His eyes met hers. "I need your help, Hannah." Without hesitation, Hannah followed him to where Jim was carefully lowering the injured man to the ground. She recognized him as Toby, one of the younger ranch hands, barely 18 years old. A nasty gash on his forehead was caked with blood and dirt. "Mrs. Garcia," Preston called. "Hot water and clean cloths, quickly." They carried Toby into the house and laid him on the sofa. Hannah immediately began examining the wound, her fingers gentle but sure. "We need to clean this," she said, "and he'll need stitches." Preston looked at her in surprise. "You know how to stitch a wound?" Hannah bit her lip. This was dangerous territory. I assisted a doctor once," she said carefully, "in Boston." It wasn't entirely a lie. The doctor who had treated her after her miscarriage had allowed her to help with other patients while she recovered, saying the work would keep her mind from dwelling on her loss. Mrs. Garcia appeared with hot water, clean cloths, and the household's medical supplies. Hannah set to work cleaning Toby's wound, her movements efficient and practiced. When it came time for the stitches, she threaded the needle with steady hands. "Are you sure about this?" Preston asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes," Hannah said firmly. "Hold him still, please." Preston placed his strong hands on Toby's shoulders while Hannah deftly stitched the wound closed. The young man moaned but didn't regain consciousness. "We need to watch for fever," Hannah said when she had finished, "and keep the wound clean. If infection sets in." "I'll send for the doctor from town," Preston decided. "Jim can go." Hannah nodded her agreement. "Until then, we should take shifts watching him. He shouldn't be moved." Throughout the night, Hannah and Preston took turns sitting with Toby. When the doctor finally arrived the following morning, he examined the wound with approval. "Clean work with those stitches," he commented. "You've had medical training, Mrs. Lawson." Hannah felt Preston's eyes on her. "Some," she admitted. "Very informal." The doctor nodded. "Well, you did right by this young man. Keep doing what you're doing and he should recover nicely." After the doctor left, Preston found Hannah in the kitchen, preparing broth for Toby. "You never mentioned your medical knowledge," he said. It wasn't an accusation, merely an observation, but Hannah felt her defenses rise nonetheless. "It didn't seem important," she said, focusing on stirring the broth. "It seems important now," Preston pointed out. "You may have saved Toby's life." Hannah put down the spoon and turned to face him. "I assisted a doctor for a short time in Boston. I learned a few things. That's all." Preston studied her face, and Hannah had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing more than she wanted him to. "Is there anything else about your life in Boston that you haven't told me?" he asked quietly. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken truths. "Tell him. A voice in Hannah's mind urged, "Tell him now." But Matthew burst into the kitchen then, full of questions about Toby, and the moment was lost. Hannah returned to stirring the broth, relief and regret warring within her. 2 days later, Toby was well enough to be moved to the bunkhouse, where the other hands could look after him. The crisis had passed, but something had changed between Hannah and Preston. A distance had crept in, subtle but undeniable. Preston watched her sometimes with a thoughtful expression, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Hannah threw herself into her household duties with renewed vigor, as if proving her worth as a wife could somehow make up for her deception. She preserved fruits for winter, sewed new shirts for both Preston and Matthew, and expanded the vegetable garden. Each night, she fell into bed exhausted, hoping that physical fatigue would quiet her troubled mind, but the truth had a way of demanding to be heard. In early July, as Hannah was cleaning the bedroom, she accidentally knocked Preston's ledger from the bedside table. As she picked it up, a folded piece of paper fell out, a letter in unfamiliar handwriting. Hannah's first instinct was to replace it unread, but a glimpse of her own name caught her eye. The letter was from Preston's sister-in-law in Sacramento, responding to his inquiry about finding Hannah's family in Boston. "I regret to inform you that no Cooper family matching your description can be located at the address provided. Furthermore, the dress shop where she claimed employment has no record of a Hannah Cooper working there in recent years." Hannah's hand trembled as she refolded the letter and returned it to the ledger. Preston had been investigating her. How much had he discovered? Did he know everything? She was still standing there, frozen with indecision, when Preston's voice came from the doorway. "I see you found it." Hannah whirled around, the ledger clutched to her chest. "Preston, I wasn't snooping. The ledger fell, and it's all right," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "I've been meaning to talk to you about it." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "About what exactly?" Preston crossed to the window, looking out over the land he loved. "When I advertised for a wife, I was prepared for some embellishment from the women who responded. Everyone wants to present themselves in the best light, but outright fabrication." "I didn't fabricate everything," Hannah said weakly. Preston turned to face her. "No. Your parents are dead, at least that much seems true, but you never worked at Phillips and Sons dressmakers. You never lived at 142 Marlborough Street. And your father wasn't a respectable clerk, he was a gambler who died owing money to half of Boston." Each word was like a physical blow. Hannah sank onto the edge of the bed, the ledger slipping from her nerveless fingers. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "Since before we married," Preston said quietly. "I had inquiries sent to Boston the day after you arrived in Red Bluff." Hannah stared at him in disbelief. "You knew? All this time you knew I was lying and you married me anyway?" Preston's expression was unreadable. "I wanted to give you a chance to tell me the truth yourself. I kept waiting, Hannah. Every day I thought, today will be the day she trusts me enough to be honest." Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you would send me away if you knew the truth." "What truth?" Preston demanded, his calm facade finally cracking. "What could be so terrible that you've spent months lying to your own husband?" Hannah's hand went instinctively to her abdomen. "I can't have children," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "At least the doctor in Boston thought it unlikely. There was a man, Thomas. He promised to marry me, but when I found myself with child, he denied everything. I was alone, disgraced. Then I fell ill with fever and I lost the baby," the doctor said. "He said the damage was too great, that I would probably never conceive again." Preston's face was like stone. "And you didn't think this was something I should know before I married you? Would you have still wanted me if you'd known?" Hannah challenged, tears streaming down her face. You said yourself you wanted children, your own children. What I wanted was honesty." Preston's voice rose in frustration. "Do you think so little of me? Do you think I'm the kind of man who would judge a woman solely on her ability to bear children?" "Most men would," Hannah said bitterly. "I am not most men," Preston retorted. He ran a hand through his hair in agitation. "Hannah, I chose you. Out of all the responses to my advertisement, I chose you because your letter spoke of partnership, of building something together. You wrote about books you loved, about teaching children, about wanting to create a real home. That's what I wanted, not just a brood mare." Hannah flinched at the crude term. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was desperate. My reputation in Boston was ruined. I had no money, no family, nowhere to go. When I saw your advertisement—" She trailed off, unable to continue. Preston was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "There's a letter in your handbag. I found it weeks ago when I was looking for a handkerchief. You'd written out the whole story addressed to me." Hannah's eyes widened in shock. "You read it, and you never said anything?" "I thought you would give it to me when you were ready," Preston explained. "I was trying to respect your need to find the right moment, but the right moment never seemed to come. And now?" Hannah asked, hardly daring to breathe. "What happens now?" Preston sighed heavily. "I don't know, Hannah. Marriage is built on trust. How can I trust you after this?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Finally, Hannah stood, wiping away her tears. "I'll understand if you want me to leave," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I can be packed by morning." Preston looked startled. "Leave? Is that what you want?" "Of course not," Hannah exclaimed. "I love it here, I love—" She stopped herself just in time. But Preston had caught her near confession. "You love what, Hannah?" She met his eyes squarely. "I love you," she said simply. "I didn't expect to, but I do. I love Matthew too. I love our life together. These past months have been the happiest of my life, despite the guilt I've carried." Something shifted in Preston's expression, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Why didn't you just tell me? After we were married, when you saw that I wasn't, when you knew me better?" "Because every day that passed made it harder," Hannah admitted. "Each day I didn't tell you was another lie added to the pile. And I was so afraid of losing everything you, Matthew, this home." Preston moved to the dresser and opened the bottom drawer. He withdrew Hannah's handbag and removed the letter, still sealed. "I never read it," he confessed. "I just saw my name on the envelope. I assumed it was a confession, but I didn't read it." Hannah stared at him in disbelief. "But you said—" "I knew there was something you weren't telling me," Preston explained. "The inconsistencies in your stories about Boston, the way you avoided certain subjects. When my inquiries revealed the falsehoods, I guessed the rest. Or some of it, anyway." He tore the envelope open and scanned the contents quickly. His expression softened as he read. "Oh, Hannah," he said finally, "you've been carrying this burden all alone." "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, fresh tears threatening. "I'm so sorry, Preston. I never meant to hurt you." Preston set the letter aside and came to sit beside her on the bed. "I'm angry," he said honestly. "And disappointed. But I understand fear, Hannah. I understand doing what you must to survive." Hope flickered in Hannah's chest. "Can you forgive me?" Preston was quiet for a long moment. "I think so," he said finally. "In time, but no more lies, Hannah, no more secrets. If this marriage is going to work, we need complete honesty between us." "I promise," Hannah said fervently. "No more lies, no more secrets." Preston reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle despite his anger. "As for children, Hannah, I already have Matthew. If he's the only child we ever raise together, that would be enough." "Really?" Hannah asked, hardly daring to believe him. "Really," Preston confirmed. "And the doctor in Boston may have been wrong. These things aren't always certain." "But if he wasn't wrong?" Hannah pressed. Then we'll face that together, Preston said firmly. There are children in this world who need homes, Hannah. If we can't have our own, perhaps we can offer a home to others who need one. Fresh tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. I don't deserve you, she whispered. Don't say that, Preston replied. You've been a good wife to me, Hannah, a good mother to Matthew. One mistake, even a big one, doesn't erase all the good. He stood and held out his hand to her. Come on. Matthew will be back from fishing with Jim soon, and I promised him we'd all have a picnic by the creek. Hannah placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip. Just like that, we go on as before, Preston shook his head. Not exactly as before. Better than before, because now there's truth between us. It might take time for me to fully trust you again, Hannah. I won't pretend otherwise, but I'm willing to try if you are. I am, Hannah said, with all my heart. They walked downstairs together, neither speaking but both acutely aware of the shift in their relationship. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since she'd arrived in Red Bluff, Hannah felt truly free. The weight of her secrets had been lifted, and though Preston's trust was damaged, it wasn't broken beyond repair. Outside, they could hear Matthew's excited voice as he returned from the creek with Jim. The boy burst through the door, waving a string of small fish triumphantly. Aunt Hannah. Uncle Preston, look what I caught. Can we have them for supper? Hannah exchanged a glance with Preston, who gave her a small nod. They're wonderful, Matthew, she said, bending to examine his catch. How about we clean them together and I'll show you how to fry them just right. As she helped Matthew prepare his fish, Hannah felt Preston's eyes on her. When she looked up, he was watching them with an expression that made her heart swell with hope. There was still love there, beneath the hurt. That night, after Matthew was asleep, Hannah and Preston sat on the porch swing, looking out at the star-filled sky. The summer air was warm, fragrant with the scent of the roses Hannah had planted along the front of the house. I've been thinking, Preston said after a comfortable silence, about what you said regarding your experience with the doctor in Boston. Hannah tensed slightly. Yes, Red Bluff could use someone with medical knowledge, Preston continued. The nearest doctor is overworked, and there are many outlying farms and ranches where people can't easily get help when they need it. Hannah turned to look at him, surprised by the direction of his thoughts. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that perhaps you could put your knowledge to use, Preston said. Not as a doctor, I know that's not possible for a woman in these times, but as someone who could help in emergencies, deliver babies, tend to minor injuries, like you did with Toby. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Do you think people would accept such help from me? A woman? Preston smiled slightly. Out here, people are practical. If you can help, they'll accept it, especially the women. Many would prefer a female presence during childbirth. Childbirth. The word still had the power to cause Hannah pain, but less than before. I would need more training, she said thoughtfully. Books, at least, and perhaps the doctor would be willing to teach me. I'll speak to him next time he's in town, Preston promised, if this is something you want. Hannah considered the possibility. It would give her a purpose beyond the household, a way to contribute to the community. And perhaps, in helping other women bring life into the world, she might find some healing for her own wounds. I think I would like that very much, she said finally. Preston nodded, looking pleased. Good, that's settled then. He hesitated, then added, Hannah, there's something else I've been meaning to tell you, something I probably should have mentioned before we married. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. What is it? My mother didn't die of influenza, as I told you, Preston admitted. She took her own life after my father's death. The grief was too much for her. I didn't tell you because, well, because people look at you differently when they know such things. Hannah reached for his hand, deeply touched by his willingness to share his own painful secret. "I'm so sorry, Preston. That must have been terrible for you." "It was," he acknowledged. "It's why I've been so determined to make a good life for Matthew. To give him stability and love so he never feels that kind of despair." "You've done that," Hannah assured him. "He's a happy, secure child. You've given him a wonderful foundation." Preston squeezed her hand. "We've given him that these past months together." The simple acknowledgement of their partnership meant more to Hannah than he could know. "Preston," she said hesitantly, "earlier today I told you that I love you. I want you to know that wasn't just said in desperation. It's true." In the silvery moonlight, she saw his expression soften. "I know," he said. "And despite everything, Hannah, I love you too. I wouldn't have been so hurt by your deception if I didn't." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes again. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Preston said with surprising candor, "but you have it anyway. That's what love is, I think, seeing someone clearly, flaws and all, and choosing them anyway." He leaned over and kissed her gently, and Hannah felt something heal inside her. The road ahead might still have its challenges, but they would face them together, with truth between them. The weeks that followed brought a gradual renewal of trust between them. True to his word, Preston arranged for Hannah to meet with Dr. Williams, who was surprisingly supportive of her interest in medical matters. He lent her books and promised to send for additional supplies from Sacramento. Word spread quickly about Mrs. Lawson's healing touch, as the locals called it. Before long, Hannah was being called to attend births, treat minor injuries, and advise on common ailments. Her first solo delivery, the healthy daughter of a nearby farmer, and his wife left her exhilarated and confident in her new role. As summer gave way to fall, Hannah found herself busier than ever. The harvest season brought its share of accidents among the ranch hands, and her skills were frequently needed. Preston supported her work wholeheartedly, often accompanying her on nighttime calls to ensure her safety. In October, as they celebrated Matthew's 6th birthday with a party that included children from neighboring ranches, Hannah found herself watching the boy with a fullness of heart she had never expected to feel. He was thriving under their care, growing taller and more articulate by the day. When he blew out the candles on his cake, Hannah caught Preston's eye across the table and saw her own happiness reflected there. That night, after the festivities had ended and Matthew was tucked into bed, exhausted from excitement, Preston took Hannah's hand and led her to their bedroom. "I have something for you," he said, withdrawing a small package from his dresser drawer. Hannah unwrapped it curiously to find a leather-bound journal with her initials stamped in gold on the cover. "It's beautiful," she said, touched by the thoughtful gift. "I thought you might want to record your medical observations," Preston explained. "Create your own reference for the future. Dr. Williams mentioned that such notes could be valuable." Hannah ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you. It's perfect." Preston sat beside her on the bed. "I'm proud of you, Hannah. You've found your place here, not just as my wife or Matthew's aunt, but as yourself. You're making a difference in people's lives." "I never expected to find such fulfillment," Hannah admitted. "When I came here, I was just looking for safety, for a roof over my head. I never imagined that you'd become the most respected woman in the county." Preston finished with a smile. Hannah laughed. "Hardly that, but I do feel useful, needed." "You are both of those things," Preston assured her, "and loved, very much loved." As winter settled over the ranch, bringing shorter days and long, cozy evenings by the fire, Hannah reflected on how far she had come in less than a year. The desperate woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Red Bluff seemed like a stranger now, someone whose fears and secrets had nearly cost her everything. Christmas brought a special joy that year. Matthew's excitement was infectious as they decorated the house with pine boughs and ribbon. Preston surprised them both by arranging for a small spruce tree to be brought in from the hills, and they spent a happy evening hanging ornaments Hannah had crafted from scraps of fabric and tin. On Christmas morning, after Matthew had gleefully opened his gifts, a new jacket, a carved wooden horse from Preston, and a book of adventure stories from Hannah, Preston handed Hannah a small box. "What's this?" she asked. "You already gave me this beautiful shawl." Preston smiled. "Open it." Inside the box was a silver key on a simple chain. Hannah looked up in confusion. "I don't understand." "It's the key to the small cabin by the creek," Preston explained. "I've had Jim and the boys fixing it up for the past month. It's going to be your clinic." Hannah's mouth fell open in surprise. "My clinic?" Preston nodded. "Dr. Williams is getting older. He says he can't make the rounds like he used to. He's agreed to train you properly as much as he can, given the limitations placed on women in medicine. The cabin will be a place where people can come to you for help when they need it." Tears of gratitude filled Hannah's eyes. "Preston, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," he urged. "The community needs you, Hannah, and I think you need this too." Hannah threw her arms around him. "Yes, of course I accept. Thank you. Thank you so much." That evening, after a festive dinner with Jim and his wife and several of the ranch hands, Preston and Hannah stood on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear winter sky. "Are you happy, Hannah?" Preston asked, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Are you?" Preston turned to face her, his expression serious. "I am. Despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, we've built something good here." Hannah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Their beginning might have been based on deception, but they had transformed it into something true and lasting. "Preston," she said hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you." A flicker of concern crossed his face. "What is it?" Hannah took a deep breath. "I've missed my monthly courses, twice now. I didn't want to say anything until I was sure, but I think I might be with child." Preston's eyes widened in disbelief. "But you said the doctor in Boston he was wrong," Hannah said simply. "Or perhaps the damage wasn't as severe as he thought. Or maybe it's just a miracle. I don't know." A slow smile spread across Preston's face. "A baby. We're going to have a baby," Hannah nodded, her own smile matching his. "It seems so. I'm still afraid to hope too much, but all the signs are there." Preston gathered her into his arms, lifting her feet off the ground in his excitement. "Hannah, this is wonderful news. You're happy then?" she asked, though his reaction left little room for doubt. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," Preston assured her. "But even if this hadn't happened, even if the doctor in Boston had been right, I want you to know that you are enough for me. You have always been enough." Hannah buried her face against his chest, overwhelmed by gratitude for this second chance at life and love. "And you for me," she whispered. Together they stood in the cold winter night, wrapped in each other's warmth, looking forward to the future they would build together, a future founded on truth and trust, on forgiveness and faith in each other. By the time spring arrived, Hannah's condition was unmistakable. Matthew was ecstatic at the prospect of a cousin to play with, and Preston's protective instincts had reached new heights, much to Hannah's amused frustration. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him after he insisted on helping her down the porch steps for the third time that day. "Humor me," Preston replied with an unrepentant grin. The small cabin by the creek had indeed been transformed into a simple but efficient clinic, with a treatment area, storage for medicines and supplies, and even a recovery bed for patients who needed observation. Hannah divided her time between her medical duties and preparing for the baby's arrival, with Mrs. Garcia taking on more of the household responsibilities. In late September, as the first hints of fall colored the trees along the creek, Hannah gave birth to a healthy son they named James Thomas Lawson. The delivery was long but uncomplicated, with Dr. Williams himself attending alongside Mrs. Garcia. When Preston was finally allowed into the bedroom, his face pale with worry, Hannah held out their swaddled son with trembling arms. "Meet your son," she said softly. Preston took the tiny bundle with awe, his large hands suddenly gentle as they cradled the newborn. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Just perfect." Matthew was permitted a brief visit, his eyes wide with wonder as he peered at his new cousin. "He's so small," the boy exclaimed. "When will he be big enough to play with?" Hannah and Preston exchanged amused glances. "It will be a while," Preston explained patiently. "But you can help us take care of him until then." Matthew nodded seriously, accepting this important responsibility. "I'll be the best cousin ever," he promised the sleeping infant. In the quiet days that followed, as Hannah recovered her strength and adjusted to motherhood, she often found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this place of contentment. The desperate young woman who had boarded a stagecoach in Boston, carrying nothing but a single trunk and a heart full of secrets, seemed like someone from a distant past. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked one evening, finding her rocking James by the bedroom window, gazing out at the land they called home. "About how far I've come," Hannah replied honestly. "About how different things might have been if I hadn't found the courage to leave Boston. Or if you hadn't been willing to give me a second chance." Preston came to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "We've both come a long way," he observed. "When I sent that advertisement east, I was looking for a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience. I never expected—" He paused, searching for words. "To fall in love," Hannah suggested with a smile. "Yes," Preston agreed. "I never expected to find someone who would become so essential to my happiness." Hannah leaned back against him, their son sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day in town, when I apologized for not meeting your expectations?" Preston chuckled softly. "I said you looked exactly as I expected." "You did," Hannah confirmed, "but I was apologizing for more than my appearance. I was so ashamed, so afraid to ask for help, to admit how desperate I truly was." "And I told you that you didn't have to ask," Preston remembered. "I meant it then and I mean it now, Hannah. Whatever you need, whatever troubles you, you never have to ask. I'm here, always." Hannah turned her face up to his, her heart full of gratitude for this man who had seen past her deceptions to the wounded soul beneath. "I know," she said simply, "and that's everything." As the years passed, the Lawson ranch prospered, as did the family that called it home. James grew into a sturdy, curious child with his father's dark hair and his mother's thoughtful eyes. Matthew, under Hannah's patient tutelage, excelled at his studies and eventually attended college in San Francisco, the first Lawson to pursue higher education. Hannah's clinic became an established part of Red Bluff life, with women from throughout the county seeking her care and advice. Dr. Williams, before his retirement, taught her everything he could, and she supplemented his teachings with medical journals Preston ordered from as far away as New York and Boston. In 1880, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Maria Lawson, named for Preston's sister and Hannah's mother. 2 years later, against all medical expectations, Hannah gave birth to twins Robert and Rose, completing their family. Preston expanded the ranch, eventually employing over 20 hands and becoming one of the most respected cattlemen in Northern California. But for all his success in business, it was his family that brought him the greatest pride. On their 10th anniversary, Preston surprised Hannah with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation since their marriage. As they stood on the deck of the ferry crossing the bay, watching the city's skyline come into view, Preston slipped his arm around his wife's waist. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Hannah considered the question honestly. "Only that I wasted so much time being afraid," she said finally. "That I didn't trust you sooner with the truth." Preston nodded, understanding. "And now?" Hannah turned to face him, taking in the face that had become so dear to her, the lines around his eyes deeper now, the silver in his hair more pronounced, but the kindness and strength unchanged. "Now I know that the greatest gift you ever gave me wasn't this," she touched the gold band on her finger, "or even our children. It was your belief in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Your willingness to see past what I had done to who I could become." Preston's eyes softened. "You did the same for me, Hannah. Before you came, I was just existing, doing my duty by Matthew, working the ranch, going through the motions. You brought life back into our home." "We saved each other then," Hannah suggested with a smile. "I think we did," Preston agreed, drawing her closer. As the ferry approached the dock, Hannah thought of all the paths not taken, all the ways her life might have unfolded if she had made different choices. But standing here, with the man she loved beside her, and the knowledge of their children safe at home with Mrs. Garcia, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The mail-order bride who had been too ashamed to ask for help had found not just assistance, but acceptance. Not just a husband, but a partner. Not just a home, but a place to belong. And in that belonging, she had finally found herself.